record. Okay. And I'm
Are
going
you planning to have a session next Sunday?
I was planning on it, although if people tell me that they're not going to be available because it's the holiday, then we'll put it off. But
We would be available. We won't be available the 2 weeks after that.
okay.
If we do it next week, you may have Jay.
Oh, that'd be great to see you. Okay, terrific. All right, so let's see. We left off last time with the whole issue of when are you supposed to recite the Megillah? Do you recite it in the month adjacent to Shvat? Because in most years are not leap years. So do you recite it in that order, Shvat and then Adar? And we also learned that it's you want to do it as soon as possible. You don't want to put off this mitzvah of reading the Megillah, or do you read it in the second month if there's a 2-month Adar, because of the idea that it's right next to Nisan, and it's a great juxtaposition between redemption and redemption. And then they came up with this. Well, it also says in the text itself that there was a second letter from Esther about Purim, and so therefore, I mean, I'm guessing that the connection of second drew them to the idea that you should read it in the second month. So the Gemara now tries to use some logic as to why it's necessary for all of these answers. How do all of these answers work, at least for Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel's position? And answer number one is to say that you need both of those suggestions. That is, as he says here, v'itztarich lemichtav hashenit. It was important to write the second. That is that verse about to confirm the second letter of Purim. And it was also, you also need the verse where it says, B'chol shana v'shana. I think, all right, I'll just leave it at that. And that we have these two verses that Rabban Gamliel was using, or it seemed like there were two separate reasons. But now the Gemara is saying, actually, you need both of those verses. The one that says you read it the same time you read it each and every year, and this verse about the second letter, because it says if I had derived the halakha only from the phrase in each and every year, I would have said my conclusion according to our question earlier was, why not celebrate it in the first Adar, closer to Shvat? Therefore, because you could be that was the answer that it was Rabbi Eliezer gave. Rabbi Eliezer said each and every year. So most years you read it in the Adar after Shvat. But because you have this second verse that talks about a second letter, the word second comes up, and so therefore we learned that, no, it should be in the second Adar. And if it had only read in the second Adar, I would have said that Purim must be celebrated both in first Adar and in second Adar from the start. Therefore, it teaches us in each and every year indicates that even in an intercalated year, that extra year, that leap year, Purim is only celebrated once. So he uses those two. So what is then Rabbi Eliezer has to respond? Well, what about that verse? What does he do with the term that the second, to confirm this second letter of Purim? Since he holds, we know that he reads it in the first month. He says you should always read it in the first month of Adar. So he understood it that notion of a second letter was actually giving us new information, that originally it was like a local holiday in Shushan because that's where all the events took place. But then it became established throughout the world after the second letter of Purim was sent out, and then everybody took on the idea. Here then we have a statement. This is really, I think, a very interesting midrash. Amar Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda, Shalcha lahem Esther lachachamim. It was, again, based on the idea that Esther is sending out these letters about celebrating Purim. And remember, she is a pretty prominent person. She's the queen of Persia. And she sends it to the chachamim, the leading sages of the day, right? This is an imagination that there's like a Sanhedrin or some kind of committee of Jewish scholars to whom she is in touch with. And so
this is supposed to be around the time the story is taking place.
Right. So this is in Esther's day. She sends out this letter. And again, you remember the rabbis, from where their perspective is, it's, if you read the book, it's like Esther just sent out a letter to all the Jewish communities and there were 127 provinces that the Ahasuerus ruled. She just sent a letter to all the Jewish communities and said, hey, this is a great day and celebrate it. They're imagining, oh, well, she had to get permission to create a holiday. She couldn't just do it on her own. So she sent it to the Agudah, the committee of sages, suggesting that they establish this holiday.
I assume there's no evidence
of the existence of any such group.
No. We don't even, I think we've already seen this group called the Knesset,
the men of the Great Assembly.
Anshe Knesset Hagdolah. Anshe Knesset Hagdolah is described in Pirkei Avot as this midway group between the prophets and the rabbinic partners, the leadership. We don't know anything about these guys. I mean, it's a concept. I have no idea if it's a reality.
It's in some sense looks like they're trying to explain that they didn't just come out of the blue.
Right, exactly.
The rabbis themselves didn't just come out of the blue.
Exactly. And this count, and I'm sure that it's also a retrodirection. It's like we have councils, we have groups of rabbis who meet together and make law and develop Jewish law. It must have been that way in the past. So anyway, that's their imagination. So that Esther sent it to the, this committee of sages and said, establish, I think it's really interesting, the language here, kavuni lidorot. It's not kivu at the, I don't know, the story, sipur, I don't know what it would be, or the, what happened, it's kivuni, establish me for future generations. And I guess reading it, obviously, now I'm reading it with modern eyes, is that we have so few female heroes and characters in the rabbinic period, and the biblical period too, perhaps, but also certainly in the rabbinic period, who are significant. And it's almost as if the text is, or whoever is developing this text is kind of saying that, let my name be out there. I want to be out there. It's not just about men. It's women also have to be established for future generations. Although clearly in context here, it's establish this story for the future. And they sent back to her, Shachula, Kina at me'oreret aleinu levein ha'umot. And this is also fascinating, right? This is a dynamic we've seen played out in Jewish history. You're gonna, if we talk about how we Jews who are living under the oppression of other empires, Gentile empires, if we talk about how we defeated the Gentiles, this is going to really be bad for us. People are going to use it against us, and it's going to arouse, as it says here, arouse the wrath of the nations upon us. So let's just keep it on the down low. And her response is, sorry, it's already out. It's already out there. You don't have to worry. It's going to be known, and therefore there's no reason to fear that, or whatever the fear is, it's already done. So you may as well internally celebrate this day, this experience. And it, wait, yeah, okay. Rav v'Rav Chanina v'Rabbi Yochanan v'Rav Chaviva matnu. Oh, and this is just telling us that whenever you see these guys mentioned, these scholars mentioned, sometimes it's not Rabbi Yochanan, it's Rabbi Yonatan that we should exchange it for, which is, I guess, interesting in terms of the development of the text itself. Why, I guess they had two different traditions. One is that Rabbi Yochanan was included, and one is that Rabbi Yonatan, probably because Rabbi Yochanan is earlier than the other guys. In any case, they said they had their own explanation of what happened with Esther and the sages. She said, "Write for me again, kivuni." Where is it? This time it's not kivuni, it's kitvuni. Write for me, lidorot. Write me in for generations in the future, that they should know this story and put it in. So I guess kitvu, the difference here is, kimu is observe the holiday, would be like, fix the holiday. This one is write it up. Make sure that this book gets into the canon. And we'll see following that there was question whether the book deserved to be in the canon, the sacred canon. And so this is what she says. So put me in the canon. Shalchu la halo katavta lecha shlishim. There's a verse in Proverbs. Have I not written for you or of you 3 times? Shalishim velo rebeim. So the story of what they're suggesting is that the story of Purim is actually the story of Amalek, the story of Agag. They're all related because they're all connected to each other, right? Amalek is the big bad guy in the Torah. His descendant, we know from the book of Samuel, was Agag, who was an Amalekite, and Haman was an Agagite. So Haman belonged to Agag, who belonged to Amalek. So, but what's not clear here is why mentioning it 3 times is not appropriate. The notes didn't really help us with this.
I thought it was the 3 and not 4.
Right, exactly. But like, why would you say why? Why is that a problem to mention it 4 times? That's what I didn't understand. Like,
I don't know.
That's what I'm saying. And the notes here didn't really help. It said, even the wisdom of Solomon, the wisest of men, warranted only 3 books in the Bible. Yeah, but I mean, we know that, the other story of redemption, we've already mentioned, Pesach. I mean, that's mentioned like every 5 minutes in the Torah. So why wouldn't you mention this story of redemption? It's not the same thing as the wisdom of King Solomon. That's something different. This is a redemption story. So I'm not really sure what the issue was. But in any case, that's what the Midrash is suggesting, that using this verse in Proverbs, there's a limit to 3 as to how many times you should mention a particular event.
Maybe here the issue is that they're just pushing back. They don't want to do it.
Maybe that's it. Maybe that there's this hesitancy, and again, then we're going to see others who say, this wasn't really this doesn't deserve to be in the canon because God's not in the book. It's a story about
the divine spirit. And so
yeah. So maybe that's it. They're just looking for an excuse, but so they come at but fortunately for us, they found a verse in the Torah which says Ketov Zot Zikaron Basefer. All right, so how do we parse that verse? Ketov Zot Masha Ketuv Kan Uva Mishne Torah. What's written here, which is in Exodus, the story of Amalek, and there's also a mention of Amalek in the Mishneh Torah, which is the rabbinic name for Deuteronomy. So that's one mention in the Torah. Zikaron Ma Shekatuv B'Nevi'im, that's written in the book of Shmuel, which is in the prophets section, and Basefer Ma Shekatuv B'Megillah. So you can get it in there because it's the 3rd mention of Amalek. We're counting it as number 3. So when they say, have I not written for you 3 times? what it really should be understood as once in each of the three sections of the canon. So we've got the Torah, the Nevi'im, prophets, and the Ketuvim, the written section. So it's okay, it fits in there. Then the Gemara comments, okay, Ketanae, there's a dispute between the Ketanaim, those scholars of the Mishnaic period, and it's found in a Baraita. So it says, Ketov Zot, Masha Ketuv Kan, that's the Exodus, story of Amalek. Zikaron, that's what's written in Deuteronomy, and Basefer, that's what's written in Shmuel. That's according to Rabbi Yoshua. So it doesn't fit. That's your three times. You don't have any more space. Rabbi Elazar Modai Omer, Ketov Zot, Mash Ketuv Kan Uva Mishnah Torah, just as we saw before. The Torah is one, Zikaron is the Nevi'im, Shmuel, and then Basefer, it's in the third section. You can write it in the section of the Megillot. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, so Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, Esther eina mitama et hayadayim. So here's another challenge to the book of Esther.
Could we go back just a minute?
Oh, sure.
At least in the English text here. Oh, no, I'm sorry, I misread something. No.
Okay. So here, this is another challenge. Shmuel says that it doesn't mitameh et yadayim. And that phrase, literally to render one's hands ritually impure, means that a text is not sacred. If it renders your hands ritually impure, then it is considered a sacred book. And he has a note here. Is this it? Where's the book about? Oh, here. The sages issued a decree that sacred scrolls shall render hands impure, accordingly, hands that come into contact with the sacred scroll, hands that come into contact with the sacred scroll acquire second-degree ritual impurity status. So that's a lesser standard of impurity, but let's see, what is it that you can, the decree was issued to encourage greater regard for these scrolls by discouraging casual contact with them, as well as to discourage the practice of storing truma with these scrolls. Truma is the food that only priests could eat, and they were very, very careful about ritual impurity, and you couldn't eat truma if it had that level, that secondary status of impurity. So you wouldn't store your truma with food, because again, the food could impart impurity. Truma is food. You wouldn't put the scrolls with the truma, because if the scrolls could impart impurity to the food, the truma food, you couldn't eat it. So you would store them separately, and there was a benefit to that, because you wouldn't attract vermin who would eat up the scrolls. And I think it's important for us to remember, originally, all of these texts were put in scrolls. That's why we call it a chumash. The Torah, that book with the Torah that is broken up into the 5 books by weekly readings, is called a chumash, which really means a fifth, because originally the Torah scrolls were written on separate scrolls, and all of these books were on separate scrolls. So you would store all of these scrolls in places, and the same for the book of prophets, all the books of prophets, and the Megillot, the separate scrolls, and they were written just like the Torah. So there are still places, I know when I was in Jerusalem many, many years ago, there were communities that would read Haftorot of the Haftarah of the week from scrolls, and it was just like reading Torah. You wouldn't have the tropes, you wouldn't have the vowels in the scrolls. So that was a real accomplishment to be able to read from those scrolls. So in any case, that's what we're talking about. It doesn't mitameh et yadayim. It doesn't render the hands ritually impure, which means you could really basically keep this scroll anywhere. Oh, so wait a minute. So the implication here is, does Shmuel not think that the book of Esther is holy, is sacred? Lememra desavar Shmuel Esther lav beruach hakodesh nemar. Does he think that it wasn't written with the inspiration of divine spirit? That it was just a humanly written book? V'ha'amar Shmuel Esther beruach hakodesh ne'emra. It was said with the divine spirit. Ne'emra likrot v'lo ne'emra lichtov. However, it was limited to the recitation. So because it was given with the divine spirit, you could, it could be read in public because of that, I guess, that level of divinity, but it wasn't stated to be written.
I'm a little confused here about the wording.
Yeah.
It was stated with the divine spirit that it is to be read in public. Now, does that mean that the statement that it is to be read in public is with divine spirit, or that the reading?
No, I think it's that's the level, you know, I think Art School had a better explanation, because I was trying to figure out, what does that mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So I think what it meant, let me see if I can find the explanation of the, in here, it was, I think it was that it was, its level of divinity was that, here, Esther was composed with the divine spirit for the purpose of reading.
Ah, okay.
It was not composed for the purpose of being written down and included in the Holy Scriptures, which makes a little easier
That's
to
a
understand.
lot clearer.
Yeah, so the idea here is that it could be taught verbally, because it's a great story, but and is an important story, and obviously God was involved in that salvation, but it wasn't to be included in the canon.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
can you read that again?
Yeah. So it says, the Shmuel holds that the book of Esther was composed with the divine spirit for the purpose of reading. It was not composed for the purpose of being written down and included in the Holy Scriptures. You might call on it might be, you know, to compare it, and of course from their period of time, probably comparable to the book of Maccabees, right? The book of Maccabees is not in our canon. I mean, we only know about it because it was put into the Apocrypha of the Catholic canon, but it's not in our book. And, you know, we can speculate why. It may have been too late. It may have been also, there clearly is a, you know, it's a human story. It also contradicts the Talmudic story about the miracle of the lights. So there are a lot of reasons why, but I think it's probably the same idea. Like Hanukkah, the story, we can tell that story. That was definitely God allowing the Maccabees to be victorious, but the book doesn't make it in. And I think that's what he's saying here. The book shouldn't have been in the canon, according to Shmuel.
When was the canon set?
That's a great question. If I wish Brandon was still joining us. Brandon would have a better explanation. Most people believe that it was pretty much set by the 3rd century, the second, or maybe even the 2nd century, before the Common Era, which is why, well, around the time of the Maccabees, that's why it's not, the Maccabees didn't make it in. But I think Brandon once told me that based on the findings of, well, the study of the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation,
right,
and which was done in the 1st century of the Common Era, and the Dead Sea Scrolls, that there is some belief now that even into the 1st century of the Common Era, the text was still being modified and changed.
Esther is quite different in the Septuagint, I believe. Isn't that?
I don't know.
I think there's a prayer to God in that
version.
Yeah, it's about 25% longer or something, and it's the only book for which there's that kind of difference.
Interesting.
I believe that's the Septuagint. Maybe that's the Vulgate, but I mean, there's some version. So Christians have a different version of Esther,
So if you-
dramatically.
If you tell someone who has read, a Christian who has read it, that God isn't mentioned, they will
Oh.
tell you you're wrong.
Oh, that's so interesting. So yeah, I'm guessing it would be the Septuagint because that
Yeah, I
was
think that's right.
that's where some of the ideas come from, is that, you know, some of this idea that it's that the canon was fixed later in time.
But the
because-
Septuagint is still before this
Septu-
Talmud, some
Right,
of this
yes.
Talmudic period.
Septuagint is definitely before the Talmud, and it's the first century of the Common Era.
Okay, yeah.
But of course, it wasn't accepted as sacred by Jewish writings, Jewish scholars. So that's very interesting. I didn't
More
know.
interestingly
I'll go
enough,
look at the Catholic Bible's version of the Esther, see what's different.
but it's also, many of these things were not accepted by the Protestants. later.
Interesting.
But I think Esther.
Esther is, yeah, but the Apocrypha is not.
Yes,
part
right.
of
The Apocrypha is not in the Protestant Bible. All right, so now we get this whole discussion of books that are in, and you know, which books were there was controversy over. So it raises an objection from right to this notion that Esther shouldn't have been added into the canon. Rabbi Meir Omer, Kohelet eino mitameat yadayim. So the book of Kohelet is in that category of books that didn't make it in the canon. Umachlochet b'shir hashirim. There was a controversy over Song of Songs. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Shir hashirim mitameat yadayim. It does. The Song of Songs definitely renders hands impure, which means it's considered sacred. But there was a machloket with Kohelet. So Kohelet was on the fence. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Kohelet mikule beit Shammai umechumre beit Hillel. In this case, kula means that it didn't mitameat yadayim. So if you were strict, you, like Beit Hillel said, it should be in the canon because it's making your hands impure. Whereas the lenient view is, no, it doesn't make your hands impure, and it wouldn't have been included in the canon. But this is according to Rabbi Shimon. Everybody agreed. Ruth, the book of Ruth, Shira Shirim, Song of Songs, and the book of Esther do mitamim et yadayim. Huda Markil Rabbi Yehoshua. So Shmuel, first before we get to that last line, is that according to this comment by Rabbi Shimon, one of these Tanaim, is that all these, that Kohelet made it in by virtue of their support from Beit Hillel, but Ruth, Shir HaShirim, and Esther, they all made it into the canon, they all mitamei yadayim. So Shmuel, thus, was arguing Rabbi Yehoshua's point up here, wherever that was, where he said that it was not according to the sanctity of the scrolls. Tanya, another Baraita, Rabbi Shimon ben Menashe Omer, Kohelet eino mitamei yadayim, mipnei shechochma shel Shlomo hi. So here we're talking about, once again, Kohelet. What was the problem with Kohelet? Well, that was written by Shlomo. That was a human person. So even though it's Shlomo, it's not written by God. And so therefore it should not have been included. Amrulo v'chizo bilvadamar. Is this were those the only things that Shlomo ever wrote? So Solomon spoke lots of proverbs, but only a few of them made it into the book of Proverbs, and that's and those teachings must have been divinely inspired. And add you not unto his words. Oh, okay. So this is the Maive Omer. Okay, so that's the question is, the Gemara is asking, why'd you throw this last line on there? What does that do to the argument? Al tosef al divarav. Maive Omer. V'chi tema meimar tuva amar v'diba'e ichtiv u'di'iba'e lo ichtiv. What is added by the proof introduced with the phrase, and it says that add you not unto his words? Why wasn't the first proof sufficient? The Gemara answers, if you would say that in terms of what he said a great deal, so he just said a lot of different things with regard to which, if he so desired, it was written, and if he so desired, it was not written, then that is why not all of his statements were preserved. Therefore, Tashma al tosef al divarav, therefore, coming here, add you not unto his words. Apparently, the reason that it is prohibited to add to the Proverbs is that the book of Ecclesiastes was divinely inspired. So that which made it into Ecclesiastes was inspired by God. All the other stuff that he did was on his own.
Is there some tradition here, perhaps is the right word, because this is looking backwards from where these guys are at the moment.
Right, exactly. Well,
but that look, we've very carefully edited this. Don't you come along and foul up our work.
Right. Well, that's a really good question as to why these books made it in at all. The book of Ecclesiastes is, except for the last verses, which make everything okay. Most of the book is very dour. It's very you could read it very cynically. And you wonder what's it doing in there. And from a modern perspective, it's like, well, this is really cool that it's in there because it speaks to a certain way of looking at the world. And it's good that you have this challenging view. And maybe that's why it was in there in the first place. But on the other hand, it definitely challenges the traditional view that, trust in God and everything's gonna be okay. Yeah. And bad things happen because you deserved it. And so I don't know why, why was the book allowed to be in there? Was it just the expansive view of the sages? And then they had to justify it because it is, again, it was written, we say at the very beginning, it's written by a person. Tradition says it's Shlomo. The book opens that these are the words of Kohelet, who was king in Jerusalem. We have no idea who this guy Kohelet was. But that means that it wasn't written by God. And so how do you justify it being in there? So these are all good questions. I don't know. Somehow there must have been a tradition or a sense that this was really a valuable book of teaching. And same thing you could say about Job, right? I mean, Job, especially according to Ed Greenstein's new translation, it is definitely a book that challenges theology.
Oh, right.
Right. You read it and you can never think, if you accept it at all, you can never think the same way about God.
Yeah, exactly. And
to throw out the happy ending that was tacked on.
Yeah. Right. And Ed Greenstein,
which saved it for the canon. But.
Right. But Ed Greenstein's point is that if you read it correctly, that isn't even a happy ending, right? Even the ending is a challenge according to his reading. So, but it got in there. So I don't know. To me, actually, that in and of itself would suggest at least the canonizers had the divine spirit on them to know to put these challenging books in there.
Yeah.
Well, one thing interesting about this is that Esther, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Songs are all fairly late.
Yeah.
I mean, the Hebrew is late Hebrew.
Right. So those are among the latter books written. And so that would also be a challenge as to why they were, why they're questioned what they're doing in there.
Well, Esther, I think there must have been this holiday that had pagan roots, around the time of the vernal equinox, and the rabbis seemed to want to keep it out, and it was loved too much.
People loved it. I think that's
right. That's one theory that they were public pressure had them put it in there.
Yeah.
So that's a possibility.
But at least they couldn't throw out the holiday, and it's weird,
Right. Well, that's the same theory about Hanukkah, because in the Talmud, the
Okay.
discussion on Hanukkah begins with my Hanukkah. What is this holiday of Hanukkah? So obviously people are doing something and they don't know.
Oh, well, that's an even clearer one, right? The winter solstice, you have to bring back the sun.
Yeah. So
I mean, it's clear in terms of antecedents.
yeah, so sometimes you're right. So sometimes popular custom, the folk observances force the hand, and they have to come up with a solution to make it to fit it into the canon.
We'll invent this miracle, which justifies
Exactly. Okay, so here we have a whole bunch of attempts to explain, here's proof that it was written as divine inspiration. So here's the first one. Rabbi Eliezer says, it must have been written Ruach HaKodesh because there's a verse, Vayomer Haman Bilibo. How would you know what Haman thought in his heart? It must have been somebody, obviously God or, must have explained what was going on. Rabbi Akiva's explanation is Esther Baruch HaKodesh Ne'emar She'ne'emar Vatihi Esther Nosed Chen Ve'enei Kol Ro'eha. How can you know that she was beloved by everybody who saw her? Must have been only divine inspiration will let you know that was so. Rabbi Meir Omer, Esther Baruch HaKodesh Ne'emra She'ne'emar Vayivadaha Davar LeMordechai. How did Mordechai know that Bigdan and Teresh were plotting? Right? Obviously, he must have gotten some message from above. Rabbi Yossi ben Durmaskit Omer, Esther Baruch HaKodesh Ne'emra She'ne'emar Uva Biza Lo Shalchu Et Yadam. They didn't lay their hands on the plunder. How would you know that not one Jew took what didn't belong to him? Only divine inspiration. Well, Amar Shmuel says, and these are all right. These are all early rabbis. These are all Tanaim. Shmuel, who was a Amorah, if had I been living at the time of the great Tanaim, I would have had even a better answer. Kimu v'kiblu, and he interprets the phrase here. They confirmed and they accepted, or they established as two different groups. Kimu is referring to the heavenly hosts, that they confirmed that this should be a sacred text. V'kiblu, and thus the humans accepted it. Kimu lamala, ma shekiblu lamata. They confirmed above what they had taken upon themselves below. So they were already observing this holiday. In fact, this is a great what'd you call it? What's what I'm looking for? It's a sociological representation of how the holiday came about. We were just saying, right? The people were observing the holiday, and then according to this, the heavenly court said, "Good idea. Let's keep that holiday going." And where it's really the sociology of it, the religious anthropology was people were observing the holiday, and so the sages then accepted and determined it was divinely inspired. But the religious explanation, the theological explanation, is people had started to observe the holiday because of the great miracle of salvation, and the heavenly retinue said, "This is great. Keep doing it. Put that book in the canon." And then, we got some more explanations here. So Rava says, "Lekulhu itlahu pircha, levar de midishmuel the late pircha." He says, well, for all of these other explanations by the Tanaim, there's a refutation. You can knock down their proofs. Only Shmuel you can't knock down. So Rabbi Eliezer said he knew in his heart. Well, it was svara, it was logical. I mean, you could figure out what Haman was thinking. He thought the king loved him and he was the number one guy. So we could assume what was in his head. The Rabbi Elkiva, Dilma Rabbi Elazar de Amar Melamed, Kol Echad Ve'echad Nidmata Lo Ke'umata. It teaches that she appeared to each and every one as one of his nation. So she was just, she was terrific. She was wonderful. She was pretty. She was smart. She had a great personality. And everybody looked at her and said, oh man, I hope she wins because she looks like she represents me. Rabbi Meir's opinion that it was, Bigtan and Teresh. Well, Bigtan and Teresh, Shnei Tarshi'im Hayu. They were Tarses, and Mordechai was very fluent in Tarsis, so he could have heard what they were saying and figured it out. And Rabbi Yossi ben Durmaskit, who said it was, because they didn't take what they didn't deserve. Nobody took the spoils. Well, they had Dilma Pristake Shadur. They had these messengers, Pristake, somewhere they had the word in here. Let's see, I think. I thought they had the term. Okay. Oh, no. Okay. Well, anyway, Pristaki are obviously messengers, and they sent out messengers, and so they knew what was going on. But only Shmuel, there's no refutation. And then we have a great folk saying, Amar Ravina, Hainu Damre Aneshe Tavachada Pilpulta Harifta Mimalay Sane Kare. One sharp pepper is better than a basket full of pumpkins. Even though, pumpkins are, you get more food out of it, but the pepper is you recognize that taste of the pepper more than the duller taste of the pumpkins. Okay, so now we go back to this. Two more proofs that it was divinely inspired. So Rav Yosef learned it from this verse. B'mei hapurim ha'ele lo ya'avru mitocha Yehudim. So he learns it from the days of Purim shall not cease. It's written in the future tense. It will not cease from the Jews. Well, I mean, how would you know unless you were divinely inspired to know that it would never cease? And Rav Nachman Bar Yitzhak argues, V'zichram lo yasuf mizaram. The memorial shall not perish from their seed. Again, how would you know unless it was written with divine, divine touch? Umatanot levyuni. Okay, the Mishnah mentions this. Now we're back to the Mishnah. Tane Rav Yosef, umishloch manot ish l're'ehu. The term here, mishloch manot, sending portions to your friends, that's shtei manot le'ish echad. Because the term here, manot is plural, ish and re'ehu are singular. So you can send you're supposed to send two portions, two special gifts to one individual. Manot le'evyonim shtei matanot l'shnei b'nei adam, indicating two gifts to two people. Again, from the language of the text. And then we have a story that explains it. Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya Shadar le Rabbi Yoshaya Atma de Igla Tilta Vegarba de Chamra Shalachle. He sent to Rabbi Yoshaya the leg of a third-born calf. I don't know, third-born calf, but and a jug of wine, and Shalachle, and then I just want to see if we had any explanation. How they know it was a third-born calf? Okay, whatever that means. All right. And Rabbi Yoshaya responded to him, Kiyamta banu rabbeinu umishloch manot ish l're'ehu umatnot le'avyonim. So basically, you fulfilled both mitzvot. Because Rabbi Yoshaya was very poor, by sending the two gifts to him, the wine and the food, the steaks, I guess, you observe the mitzvah of sending portions to your friend and also gifts to the poor. So that teaches us that you can observe both mitzvot with sending one gift. Sending to one person, the two gifts. Rabba Shadarle Lemare Barmar Biyad Abai Malay Taska de Kashva. Okay, so this was a little confusing, so I don't know if you got what you guys made of it. The Gemara relates that Rabbah sent Purim portions from the house of the exilarch to Mari Bar Mar in the hands of Abaye, who was nephew and suit. Now, I think, not from the, I don't think it's from the, Rabbah was the scholar, and he's sending Purim portions to the exilarch. I'm pretty sure Mari Bar Mar is the exilarch. Where's my notes? No, okay, it doesn't help us. But yeah, Mari Bar Mar was the exilarch. And Rabbah is the scholar, and he sends it via Abaye. The Purim portions consisted of a sack full of dates and a cup full of roasted flour. Now Abaye said to him, so Abaye says to his uncle, Hashta Amar Mari, I Hakla'a Malka Lehave. Even if a farmer becomes the king, the basket does not descend from his neck. See, Rabbah was the head of the yeshiva, but he sent a very plain gift because he was impoverished. So the idea is, Mari is going to be a little, it sounds like to me that Mari is going to be insulted, and Abaye is trying to warn his uncle, now that you're a big macher, as the head of the yeshiva, you really can't keep sending out these minimal gifts, even if you don't, you're limited in your funds. Hadar shadar le ihu male taska dizan gevila. Mari Bar Mar sent back to him a sack full of ginger and a cup full of long peppers, a much more expensive gift. Abaye said to him, the master Rabbah, Hashta Amar Mar, Ana Shidari Lechulia, Veihu Shidari Lechurfa. I sent him sweet items, and he sent me pungent ones. So I don't know what the point, like, I don't know, according to Steinsaltz's interpretation, it's not really clear, because Mari Bar Mar sent him a very expensive gift because these were spices that were very valuable. And I can't tell, is Rabbah's response to be insulted because I sent him like sweets and he sent me savory stuff? Art Scroll interpreted it as I sent that the sack full of ginger and peppers were comparably plain, so it was a equally simple gift, and Rabbah was insulted in that way.
So it's Abe saying Rabbah will be insulted.
Yeah, that's what, right.
So, Abe has first said to Rabbah, Mari will be insulted, and then he says to Mari, Rabbah will be insulted.
Yeah,
right.
So this may be trying to make each of them feel like they haven't done enough or something. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. So I can't. Well, I don't know if the what Abaye is saying is that Rabbah is going to be insulted, or he's just, because the gift is plain, or because it's not in the. You should always send sweets. Don't send spices.
This says pungent, so I don't know if that's an accurate translation.
Yeah. Churfa is hot, spicy.
Yeah, so maybe that was viewed as something somewhat unpleasant.
Yeah,
I mean, that's not how I would think of it, but the context made me wonder that.
I wonder if I don't quite get the popular expression about if the farmer becomes king, the basket does not.
Just like, it,
I think maybe, yeah.
It's like my, anybody who had, if you have parents who grew up, or in my case, I have parents, but also grandparents who grew up in the Depression, right? Even when they make it, they're still, very careful on their food. They don't spend too much money.
My parents were extremely careful about small amounts of money.
Right, right.
They're not particularly careful or insightful about larger amounts.
Oh,
but
okay.
Small amounts were tremendously important.
But so I don't really so the story is just confusing to me. I'm not really sure what the point of it is.
Yeah.
And then we get, and then we get another a piece of the story, which again is kind of not really sure what to make of it. But Amar Abaye ki nafki mi be mar hava savana. When I left the house of the master to go to Mari Bar Mar, I was already satiated. However, when I arrived there at Mari Bar Mar's house, they served me 60 plates of 60 kinds of cooked dishes, and I ate 60 portions from each of them. The last dish was called pot roast. I love that. Like, this is the first time we've ever heard of pot roast. And the Hebrew term is sli kedar. It's just a meat that's roasted without water inside a pot. Kind of like,
as I read it, he ate 3,600 portions.
Yeah, man, he was hungry, and he was still so
very busy as well. This beats Rachel bringing water up from the well.
Yeah, and I was still so hungry that I wanted to chew on the plate afterwards. So here, which then of course explains this folk saying the poor man is hungry and does not know it. So even though he left, he thought he was satiated because, when he left Rabbah, who was not wealthy, and he left with what he was used to eating, he was, but when he got to the rich man's house, the exilarch, who had all these delicious foods and so much that he just couldn't stop eating, and he didn't even realize how hungry he was. It's only because he didn't have that he thought he was satiated. But once you recognize what you don't have, your eyes get bigger. I think that's so in a sense, I love that story because I think it's a truism for a lot of people, especially for those who come from very little and then become very wealthy. All of a sudden, enough is not enough. But the other alternative, it said, the folk say is, which I've adopted as my own, Ravcha livsima shachiach. Room in the stomach for sweets can always be found. There's always room for sweets. Here's, we have some great.
Very appropriate to be reading this week.
Yeah, exactly. Abai bar Avin v'Rabbi Chanina bar Avin michalfei sudataihu lahada day. So here's another example of how you can, help people exchange gifts. They would just exchange their own meals. So you don't have to really even, make something special. You make your special su'udah meal and you send it to your friend, and he sends you his meal, and then you fulfill your obligation. And then we get this famous statement that everybody loves about Purim. This is from Rava. Michayev inish livsume befuria adelo yada bein arur haman levaruch Mordechai. A person is obligated to become intoxicated with wine on Purim, or with anything, I guess, until he is so intoxicated he does not know how to distinguish between cursed is Haman and blessed is Mordechai. This has always been a very strange statement to me. First of all, why would you want to get so drunk? Because that you can't. Secondly, why would you not want to know the difference between cursed is Haman and blessed is Mordechai? That seems pretty important, to know the difference between cursing bad guys and blessing good guys. So here they give you a lot of explanation, a lot of possibilities, because obviously it was troubling to sages. And some of it is, well, you're supposed to fall asleep. That's what it is. You just drink enough to take a nap. What was this one? The Jerusalem explains that after reading the Megillah, it was customary to recite several passages relating to characters mentioned in it. And some say it was a poem. A person will be unable to recite these texts correctly if he's intoxicated. And that'll be, so there it's kind of like a funny game. but I don't. Oh, and this is another. It's a gematria. Cursed is Haman, and blessed is Mordechai. And you're not supposed to be able to make the mathematical calculations of the two names. Yeah, I don't know why you wouldn't want to distinguish between diametric opposites. I don't know why that's a good thing. But this is, we hear about this every year, and people take it to extremes, and this is a favorite thing with Chabadniks on college campuses. They get a lot of people drunk who shouldn't be drinking, and they think it's so funny, and it makes Chabad a fun place to go. But a lot of times it can cause problems, and people get sick. It's not good. It's okay to drink a little bit more than maybe normal, but these are one of the fascinating things about Talmud. And there's a scholar, Barry Wimpheimer at Northwestern, who's written a book about how the Talmud, how the development of law in the Talmud, and how very often a law will be declared, and then the Talmud will undermine it with an agadah, a story. So we just heard that you're supposed to become obligated to drink wine, and now comes a story which clearly suggests that this is a terrible idea. Rabbi Zera avadu seudat Purim bahadeh. Rabbi and Rabbi Zera had Purim Suda together. Ibasom, they got drunk. Kam Rabba shechatei Rabbi Zera. He got up and killed him. He slaughtered his friend because they were so drunk. The next day, he asked for mercy, and Rabbi Zera came back to life.
Okay, so this translation is "and revived him," which sounds like Rabbah is doing the reviving, but your translation is "he came back to life." That's
right. He asked God, right. Well, Ba'e Rachme is he prayed to God for mercy, and I'm assuming it was God who revived him. God who brought him back to life.
Yeah, the translation didn't read that way.
Oh, okay. No, he definitely he killed him, and then he came back to life.
So it says that he came back to life. So Achaye is he came back to
like the word chai, right? Chai is life.
Yeah, but that must be an Aramaic form of it.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
And I don't know Aramaic, so
right. So okay, so all right. Next year, Purim comes around. Invitations go out. Nete marvinavet sudat Purim bahade harade. So Rava said to Rabbi Zera, "Hey, why don't you come over for Purim Suda this year?" And his response is, "Amarle lo b'chol shata v'shata mitrachesh nisa." Miracles don't always happen every year. You can't count on miracles. So obviously, the point was, this is a terrible idea to get drunk. Terrible things happen when people get drunk. And we know that in our society, the gun killings in this country, almost, the vast majority end up, at least with people who know each other, who end up killing each other, not intentionally or even intentionally, but it's because they're drunk. And so terrible idea to get so drunk. And that's what the story seems to be telling us. But I do love the fact that Rabbi Zera was smart enough to say, you know what, not this year, I'm not coming over. And then, it's 12 o'clock. Okay, then we'll finish this, and maybe we'll pick up next time we'll finish the rest of it. Amar Rava Sudat Purim Sha'achala B'Laila Lo Yatsa Yedei Chavato. Oh, I realized I think I sent out to translation. I missed one key word, the word not. The Purim feast is not supposed to be done at night. Usually our big feasts are at night. It's, Friday night we have a big meal. Chagim, you have a big meal. Rosh Hashanah, the evening meal is the big meal. Here it's the obligation of the feast. If you ate it at night, you didn't fulfill the mitzvah of the Su'udah of Purim. The Su'udah of Purim is supposed to take place during the day, so it's kind of unusual in that way from the other holidays. And then, how did they learn this? Maitama Yemei Mishteh V'Simcha Kativ. It says the days days of feasting and gladness, not nights. Rav Ashi Havayate Kamed Rav Kahana Negav Lo Atu Rabbanan. So Rav Ashi was sitting before Rav Kahana, and it got dark, and the sages who usually came to study in the evening didn't come. And Rav Ashi said to him, "What's the reason the sages did not come today?" And Rav Kahana said, "Perhaps that." So this must be the day of Purim. It's not the night of Purim. Perhaps they are preoccupied with the Purim feast. You know, their feast went over, so they didn't come tonight to study. And Rav Ashi said, "Wasn't it possible for them to eat the feast be'urta, the night before?" Amar le la shamia le lemar hada amar Rava. Didn't you learn from the master, from your teacher, that Rava taught, Seudat Purim she'achala b'layla lo yatsa yedei chovato. If you've eaten your feast at night, you still haven't fulfilled the obligation of the Purim feast. Amar le'in, Tana mine arba'in zimnim vidame le keman demana bekisei. And Rav Ashi said to him, "Did Rava say that?" And Rav Kahana said to him, "Yes." Rav Ashi then learned it from him 40 times until he remembered it so well that it seemed to him as if it were placed in his purse. I like that ending too, that you know, he was like, "Ooh, I didn't remember that teaching well enough, so I'm gonna, you know, go over it and over and over until I really know it." And I think that's a message to you know, to students that you know, if you forgot something or you didn't learn it well, just you got to keep learning it and over again until you really know it. It's not enough to practice one time. Okay, any thoughts on those stories and how that will impact on your Purim celebrations or even Thanksgiving, I suppose? Be careful of Thanksgiving as well. All right, let's do one more minute and we'll go over the Mishnah so that we know what we're coming up to, because this is important. The rest of this chapter, I believe, or at least the chapters of the Mishnah, now take up this idea, this concept, ein bein X le Y, Ella. So there's no difference between this and that except for this one particular area. We had that already with regarding Purim, when there was no difference between, what was there? There's no difference between, first and second Adar, of course. There's no difference between observing Purim in Adar 1 or Purim Adar 2, except for Megillah. So here it's, did I go too far? No, here there's no difference between festivals and Shabbat, except for food preparation. And then we're going to hear a difference between Shabbat and Yom Kippur in terms of punishments. And then it gets really into very graphic stuff, which I wrote a note for this week. Really, this is the kind of stuff that tries my patience with Talmud, but in some ways it's really the purest form of Talmud study because it has no reality to our lives. So what's the difference between a Zav of 2 days? Zav is the seminal emission, and a Zav who has it for 3 days. And oh God, do we really have to talk about this? But yes, they do. They talked about it because it was in Torah, and it was important for them to understand distinctions. And that's really, in some ways, Talmud at its purest, because you're not learning it for any other reason than Lishma, for the sake of itself. But from my perspective, it gets really hard because I have no way to identify with it, But we'll slog through the next couple of dapim that deal with these issues, and then we'll eventually get back to the Book of Esther and interpretations of the various verses, which are a lot more interesting to me. Okay. Anyway, everybody have a great Thanksgiving, and we will meet next week.
Rabbi,
yeah.
Do you have any source of how can I learn the tropes of the Megillah? I know that the Pocket Torah has
it's not so great.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yes, I do. I can get you, I've got a CD with Megillot on it. So I can
Okay.
give that to you.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Take care. Bye.
You too. Bye.
Hey, happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.